The Cavaliers back to work after a 113-112 loss to the Philadelphia 76ers in their first preseason game of the season. Our thoughts on a backcourt featuring Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, Caris LeVert getting the first crack at the starting three position. And is JB Bickerstaff a Geno's or a Pat's guy when it comes to the Philly cheesesteak? All that and more coming up on the Cavs Insider Podcast. Well, leave it to me to roll the wrong intro, but here we are nonetheless on the Cavs Insider Podcast. John Rudder with Spencer German. That was the only thing that I didn't want to mess up as we started this, and we are off to a roaring start here, just 50 seconds into this, my man. How you been?
I've been pretty good, John. We'll cut you some slack, John. This is a new site. We're all kind of learning the ropes, getting familiarized with everything. So it's all good, man. We all make those errors in this business. It happens.
Literally realized that as I pressed the button, I was like, "That's wrong. Can't go back now." So, here we go. But we're coming at you after this preseason game number one. A lot to like from the Cavaliers in that first, really the first opening two quarters after the reserves kind of took over last night. The big story, obviously, that folks are paying attention to, Donovan Mitchell, and then who's going to be starting in that small forward position. So I'll turn things over to you right off the bat. Thought Mitchell looked pretty good. There was a lot to like, and I think that there's a lot to be excited for that you can expect as we get close to the season now.
Yeah, no doubt about it, John. I mean, I know. So I was hosting a show last night on 92.3, but one of our many places of employment. But when we had the game on in studio, I was kind of in between breaks, catching some glimpses where I could. And I know I saw ESPN tweeting some of the Donovan Mitchell I could tell him that Cavs fan watching. Again, we know it's the preseason. It's not going to give you a full indication of what this team's going to be or everything that they're going to be doing out on the floor. But if you were kind of tuning in to kind of get a first glimpse of what is he going to look like in a Cavs uniform, how is he going to mesh with Darius Garland, how is this all going to kind of work, I think you got that. Like, he showed up, first chance to really be out there with his teammates, and he looked good. He looked like he was motivated, energized, and definitely brought a little extra juice to the lineup, which was good to see. So I guess early returns on as good as you can get from a preseason game. It looks like he's fitting right in already, and that this thing's going to be pretty exciting to watch right out of the gate when the season does start. In terms of the small forward position, I've gone like around and around with this conversation. I know when we first talked about it, I mentioned I think LeVert maybe has the inside track, and it looked like last night with him being in that 3 spot that maybe he does. But I got to tell you, John, like the more and more I think about it, I kind of want to see Okoro there as the main starter, just because you're starting LeVert if you think you need the offense from him. And that's why they traded for him last year. Like, they needed that other scorer with Darius Garland. But now that you have Donovan Mitchell, I don't know if I feel as adamant that you have to have him in the starting lineup. And I kind of like the idea of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen kind of manning and guarding the paint. They're your rim protectors, right? But they can step out and guard the perimeter, and they're going to be great scorers in their own right, Mobley most notably. And then you have the two guards in Garland and Mitchell on the outside who can knock it down from anywhere. And then I kind of like if you insert Okoro where he's more of a defensive-minded player. He's maybe a weakness for you offensively. But I also think in year 3, we're all hoping he can take that next step. And maybe when he has like 4 scorers around him who can take the pressure off, he doesn't have to feel like he's pressing and trying to score all the time. Maybe that brings that out of him, and he becomes that 3-and-D player that we all hope he can be. So I kind of like that idea, but I understand maybe why Caris is maybe getting the first look at it. And truly, this could maybe end up a position where they're rotating a bit depending on the matchup. Like, it could be Caris some nights, it could be Okoro some nights. But right now, like in my mind, I love the idea of Okoro out there as an extra defender, and then you have LeVert, one of the first big scorers off your bench. I think that's a beautiful concept if they were to run with that.
I think it was easy for us to kind of talk about it, as, oh, maybe we want that extra offense with Caris LeVert. But then you see it in action with Donovan Mitchell on the floor, and there's a lot more space out on that floor than I thought there might be. I think that was something that might even have caught the Cavs off guard as well.
Yeah.
They talked about this today in the media availability. It's Caris and then JB specifically, but we also talked to Dean Wade too. But they both said, like, look, there was a lot of open space out there, and that hasn't been the case when it comes to practice. Like, I think that the Cavs kind of expected Philly to maybe lock it down a little bit more than they did. But they said that they saw a lot more open looks than they've seen in practice. A lot of hands in passing lanes, a lot of balls that are contested and passes that are contested in practice. And they were able to see some open looks and knock down those open looks. I think the first 15 points came from beyond the arc. And this was a team that really struggled to shoot threes. Having Donovan Mitchell out there certainly helps that. We talked about Caris LeVert. I'm kind of in the same boat. I was like, every time I talk about this, I think I have a new front runner and a new favorite in this category. What I did like to see, and it was the chemistry that he also showed, that LeVert also showed with Mitchell when Garland was on the bench, because we saw, the experiment with Darius and Donovan out there for a while. And then Donovan kind of took the reins while Darius was on the bench and, showed that, still a proven scorer. But what I also liked was he wasn't afraid to go to the dirty areas. Like, we saw him down low a little bit. We saw him get a couple of offensive boards. And then he showed some nice chemistry with Caris. So there was a couple of give and goes that looked pretty sweet as well.
Let me ask you this, John, after watching the game last night, and Cedi is an interesting player to me because last year he kind of got put in the doghouse a little bit. Maybe it wasn't the doghouse. That might be the wrong phrasing. But I know just from talking with people who were covering the team and around the team, like, he's just not necessarily the style of player that JB Bickerstaff wants in the lineup, I think, in some respects. And so I'm kind of trying to figure out, like, what his role is. Like, where does he fit in all this? Yeah. I'm imagining at this point he's coming off the bench, because I think we just kind of rattled off a whole bunch of names of guys who probably fit the three better than him. Okoro, LeVert, maybe Dean Wade is like an outside dark horse chance. But I don't know, like, what role do you think Cedi maybe fills on this team as maybe a guy coming off the bench? And how do you see him maybe gelling with this group?
Well, I know JB's played, the lip service game as far as saying, like, look, he's in the conversation for that starting role, but I really get the sense that, it's, more of a 2 or 3 horse race when it comes to like Caris, Isaac, maybe if you want to throw like a Lamar or a Dean in there, like 3 or 4 horse. Like, I don't necessarily envision him as like a true contender for this. He most certainly has a role coming off the bench with this team, but that's a great point, because we kind of wondered where Cedi had been all preseason. We haven't talked to him a whole lot. He hasn't been available to the media a whole lot. And then when he did talk, he was kind of like a more laid back version. He was still his typical affable self that we've come to know and love. But I just got a different sense from him. Like, maybe he feels a little bit of pressure to kind of fit in. Maybe he said that this is an important season. And he also said that this is an important season for him. And then when pressed, why is this an important season for you? He kind of walked it back a little bit and said, well, I just want to build on the team chemistry and build on the success that we had last year. But you could kind of sense that he has the feeling that, like, this is an important campaign for him and he needs to show his value here. And the roles that he fills, I kind of get the sense that there are other guys that fill them on the team and maybe fill them better, a little bit younger, a little bit faster, a little bit better defender, a little bit better shooter. Like, he was a great guy to have, on a team that was coming off of the LeBron James departure with the Colin Sexton selection. He was somebody that could go out there and eat up minutes and score points. But we've kind of moved past that. Like, I hate to use this analogy. It is a baseball analogy, and it is because I had followed the Pirates so closely when I was younger. But Garrett Jones wanted to be a regular player in the lineup, and Clint Hurdle told him, well, you were a good player on a bad baseball team. We're trying to not be a bad baseball team. And I love Cedi, and I think that he does bring a lot of value to this team. But, Cedi was a good player on a team that was kind of mediocre, and now we've got 4 All-Stars potentially in this lineup, and we've kind of moved past that right now.
It's a good way to look at it, and very good points from you, John. I mean, I'll start by saying this: like, it's a good problem to have, right?
Sure.
It's rare that we've been able to, even in the LeBron James days, like even when he came back the second time and really the first time too, who we kidding? Like those teams were not deep at all. I mean,
No.
even the team that won in 2016, like they were that was probably the deepest group he had here. But like, it wasn't like they had these two units where you were like, oh man, like they got a lot of, you know what I mean? Like it was the starters, it was LeBron carrying the weight, and those guys playing, most of the minutes, and then especially in the playoffs, and
the big three.
The rest of the yeah, and then the rest of the group, it kind of was what it was. This is the first time in a while that I've like looked at the Cavs and been able to say like, man, first unit, second unit, top to bottom, they have so much depth here. So it's a good problem to have. It's good to have too many bodies, but Cedi's just interesting to me because I do see a guy who has been kind of floated out there as a trade chip in the past, and maybe that comes to fruition at the deadline this year if they're looking to maybe add a piece and he can be part of some package. But you're right, like he was a role player when LeBron was here. He was a good player on a bad team, and now he's kind of got to figure out what his role is, which is, to your point, why he maybe alluded to this is a big year for him on a team that now has 4 All-Stars and obviously has really high aspirations this season.
He also did say that, with regard to the trade talks and his future, he heard that. He was like, yeah, I hear that. I try not to pay much attention to it. The lines of communication are always open between JB and Mike Gansey and Kobe Altman, but he did say that he met with them over the summer. It didn't necessarily seek them out specifically to like directly ask about his future and his role with this team, but he certainly said that he had heard those trade talks, but it wasn't something that he was necessarily focused on. Said he's happy in Cleveland, said he wants to be in Cleveland, but I almost got the sense like he's like maybe wrestling with his own like mortality at this point. Like where do I go from here in my career? I'm happy in Cleveland. I've made a home here in Cleveland. I've been part of this, the beginning of this ascent, and I would like to be a part of it. But where does the organization see my fit in that? That's ultimately up to him and his play, but I really got that sense from him the other day.
Yeah, no, and I can understand why, that the trade rumors being in that conversation a couple years in a row now probably does make you almost think of like your own mortality. Like, oh, how much longer do I have here? I think all players kind of deal with that to an extent. I mean, you always hear guys at the deadline get asked about, are you worried at all about what your team's going to look like, or if you're going to be here, or if this person's going to be here? And they all know it could happen. I mean, it's a business at the end of the day. But you got to kind of compartmentalize it. I'm sure that's what he's probably going to try to do. I had a question for you, John, that I actually saw pop up as kind of a thought on, I think on the YouTube page for Cavs Insider, where we posted about the Evan Mobley injury, out 1 to 2 weeks with the ankle. And I thought it was actually a pretty interesting thought because there's fans, I think, who are actually wondering, is this like a doomsday scenario or a bad omen that Evan Mobley is going to end up in a similar boat as Anthony Davis? Again, tall guy. They're similar heights. I want to say Mobley's like an inch taller. He's definitely thinner and weight-wise than AD, but I can understand the concern there of like why you look at this prototype of a player and think like, oh, ankle injuries, and he had the elbow obviously last year, which is kind of more of a fluky thing. But I mean, I can understand why people maybe be concerned about that. Do you have? I talked about this at a different place, but I kind of used like the worry meter. And I said, for me, it's at like a 1.8 to 2. Like I see it on the horizon. It's like, yeah, it's a little concerning now that I think about it, but I'm not like overly concerned at this point in his career. But where would you maybe put that for you? Like, is it something that you, because it could be an issue for him throughout his career?
Well, it's something that's certainly registering on the radar at this point, specifically because, a similar injury happened to him last year. Like he came down on Franz Wagner's foot at the end of March and missed about 5 games towards the end of March. So different foot, but similar type of injury, landed on somebody's foot and rolled the ankle. He's made a concerted effort in the offseason to like get stronger and build flexibility and hopefully that eliminates some of those problems, with the ankle and some of these injuries if he's building that strength. But it's definitely something that has popped into my mind recently, and I floated it out there at the facility the other day when we were talking. I think I even brought this up with Brendan maybe the other day during one of our podcasts. Like, he's just similar to Anthony Davis. Like, he's just a long, like, lanky guy. And I just wonder if that maybe lends itself to, rolling an ankle. It doesn't appear like it's going to be anything severe. They're kind of taking it day by day. It doesn't sound like he's done. He's, back to working on the court. But I'm of the camp of, let's put this guy in bubble wrap and let's get him to the season. Like, I don't need to see him in any preseason games this year. Like, I'm fine if we just roll him out on October 19th against the Raptors.
I'm right there with you. I mean, the smartest thing they can do is not rush him back, right? Like, that would just be silly. You want him for that home stretch of, March, April into the playoffs. You don't want to be worrying about, even if he misses a game or two to start the season, because they just want to give him a little extra time. Fine. I get it. Like, fans want this team to start developing the chemistry as soon as possible with Donovan Mitchell now out there, and how's everybody going to kind of fit? But I'm willing to wait 2 games on that if it means Evan Mobley's healthy and he's able to compete with this team come playoff time, because that's when you're really going to want him the most. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. Don't rush him back. Just take it easy. Put him in bubble wrap.
One other injury note to bring up: Dylan Windler was out of the lineup last night because of an ankle injury that he suffered. I believe it was Monday afternoon, so before the team left, right before the team left. Mobley didn't travel with the team to Philadelphia. I don't believe Windler did as well. I did hear today that they expect Windler to maybe practice potentially tomorrow. So that is a little bit of good news with regards to him. But, man, you talk about a guy who consistently is not available. I think that the guy does have some talent and is able to be maybe one of those perimeter threats, but this is someone who has just never been able to consistently be in the lineup and stay healthy. It's disappointing to see from the kid too.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, John, because they drafted him and there was some excitement about could he be a player? Again, it was a bad team. So you're kind of figuring out where does he slot in? Where could he potentially pop up? But yeah, I mean, it's you hate to see a young guy have these issues early in his career where it just continues to plague him. And we always give guys the injury prone label and the tag, and maybe that's what the situation is here. But it's unfortunate that we've never gotten to see him blossom into what he could be, even find out what he could be. And the more and more that these injuries bother him, obviously, or are a thing, the less there is to find out what type of player he is. So, yeah, I mean, that stinks. It's unfortunate for him, and obviously unfortunate for the Cavs that we may never get to know his true potential if this keeps happening, especially now on a team where his minutes are going to be limited anyway, right? Because the team, like we just said it, they're very deep, they're stacked as is. They have 4 potential all-stars on the roster. He's not going to see a lot of court time anyway, and so now it's kind of like a guessing game as to what he can be or how much he can actually develop here.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem is because of all these injuries and his lack of being available on the floor. You really don't even know what you have with him. You just know that you have this invested pick. All right, we'll wrap up with this. JB Bickerstaff, or rather, we'll back up a little bit, but the Cavaliers in Philadelphia last night, a 113-112 loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. City of brotherly love. It's also the city of the cheesesteak. I always try to make a point to ask somebody a question, whether it's a coach or a player, right as they're sitting down, just something that is, more of a normal question. How was the road trip?
Break the ice a little bit.
Yes, exactly. Just to kind of loosen them up, just to essentially just try to maybe get to know them a little bit more as a person. And JB was sitting down today, and I asked how the road trip was, and I said, "Are you a Geno's or a Pat's guy?" Because those are usually the 2 staples when it comes to cheesesteaks in Philadelphia. He is team neither. He's a Campos guy, he said. So I had to look it up. I was like, I've never actually even heard of it. So I'm a little mediocre, lukewarm on the cheesesteak myself. Never been the biggest Philadelphia fan to begin with, and I kind of lumped the cheesesteak in there as well. I know. But I thought that was interesting that he's like, leave it to JB. He goes his own route.
Listen, no matter how you feel about Philly, the cheesesteak, it's incredible. I started making homemade cheesesteaks now, and it's one of
We'll go with the German.
Yeah. I'll just make my own. We can just call it whatever. Yeah, it's one of my wife always says it's one of her favorite meals I make. Our homemade cheesesteak. So if I remember correctly, now here's what I'll say about Pat's and Geno's.
For the record, I've never had either.
Okay, well, a little free publicity here. If I remember correctly, when I went the last time I was in Philly with like a group of my friends. This wasn't the last time I was there, I guess, but one time I went there with a group of friends. We tried both, and I think I like Pat's a little bit more. But I've always been told from people who are like from Philly or love Philly or just are Philly fans, whatever. They always tell me like those aren't even the places you want to go, and they throw out like these obscure places, like you mentioned. What was it, Campos? You said was JB's. I've never even heard of Campos, but like everybody has like a hole in the wall cheesesteak spot, and I got to make a list because I keep forgetting what these places are. And the next time I go to Philly, I want to actually try these other places that the locals actually say are the places to go because I want to find the best cheesesteak in Philly. So if it's not Pat's and Geno's, I got to find out where it is.
That's funny that you mentioned that because I do have a buddy that is from Philly, and he said the exact same thing. He's like, everybody always wants to go to Pat's or Geno's. He's like, and the answer is neither of them. So in the same deal, he had a homemade place or a little hometown shop that he recommended as well. All right, Spence, good stuff. You will be at the Wine and Gold scrimmage on Saturday.
Yes, I believe we found out it's at 11 a.m. From what I understand, I think it's going to be pretty low key. Just, I think an hour, a little over that of just kind of them playing against each other. And then, I think there's a little bit of media availability after, and we'll be sure to post some of those up to the YouTube page and obviously on our social media accounts. So be sure to follow along with that. But yeah, looking forward to getting out there and kind of getting my first exposure to the team in a practice / scrimmage setting. So it should be fun.
And then the Cavaliers back on the floor for preseason game number 2 against these same 76ers on Monday evening. Should be a busy weekend here in Northeast Ohio with the Guardians, Cavaliers at a Wine and Gold scrimmage, and then the game on Monday. We will keep you up to date with everything. You can follow along on Twitter at CavsInsider_FN, and of course here on the YouTube page and on the podcast as well. For John Rutter, Spencer German, this has been the Cavs Insider Podcast here on Cavs Insider.